Can you hear me now? All right, coming at you live. This is your friendly neighborhood rabbi. My name is Rabbi John Carrier. Actually, my name is John Carrier. Rabbi is my title. It means I can teach Torah to people. So I'm super excited that you've been able to join me, and I would love to see in the chat whether you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yay, we have sound. Let's see. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to jump right into it. And again, thank you especially for those of you who came back. And so now my challenge is, let's see, sync to preview player. Da, 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 da. So now my challenge is reading the live stream. Okay? Okay. So let me mute that. And where's my chat at? Okay, still not perfect at this. Here we go. Okay. So Larry's got it now. I'm just going to type in high five. All right, everybody give me a high five if you can hear me and you can see me. So, hello, Jason from Dublin, Ireland. Hello, Larry. I think, where's Larry coming in from? I forget. Is Larry coming in from England or Texas? I forgot exactly where Larry's from. We got Caleb Rahino. We got Alexei von Radlov. Sorry about that. We got Vanessa, our friend from Germany. Carla, our friend from right here in sunny Southern California. And I am so excited to be on live, and it seems to work. So let's get going. We got Milo from a friend from Denmark is here. So what I wanted to do today is first thank everybody who has been part of the Jewcurious community. Since I started this podcast, the Jewcurious Show, back near the end of June, I think it was, we've had about 21 shows now. Taking a little break while we get some new interviews going and have some more on the docket soon. In the process of putting that show together, I met a lot of great people and been figuring out how to teach Torah online almost purely. I teach some classes here live in LA. I work for the Miller Intro to Judaism program. I work for the Melton School of Adult Jewish Learning. My favorite thing to do is teach Torah online. I'm about to do that any second now, I promise. Today is the day that we're going to talk about how to become Jewish. A couple of days ago, I made a big announcement that the Jewcurious School, that's the online school that I put together, and we've got about 30 students in that school right now. A couple of days ago, I announced that we were going to be offering a class intended to help people who want to convert to Judaism. And so far, it's been Torah Lishma. It's been Torah learning for its own sake, which is a mitzvah, one of my favorite things to do. But somebody reached out to me and said, that's nice. How about for people who are learning Torah for a particular goal, namely becoming Jewish? And I thought, well, I've been teaching Intro to Judaism students for a bunch of years now. I now have a platform to reach people literally all over the world who may not have access to a synagogue, may not have access to the kind of live classes. I mean, Los Angeles is the, I'll say, second biggest Jewish metropolis in the U.S. with like 600,000 Jewish people. And we have a couple of classes here and there. But all the more so people out far from Los Angeles, people in Washington, people in Texas, people in Florida may not have access to that. And so I thought, what a great thing to do is to connect people with learning that they can't connect to. Or maybe people live in the cities, but they're just busy. Right? They can't make it to a class. Traffic is a nightmare in LA. People work jobs that take place when those classes happen. So, put together a school. We'll talk about that later. But before we get into that, I want to actually go through the process of how to become Jewish. What does it take? So, there are about, I'll say, 4.5 steps to becoming Jewish. And I shared this with some people before, and they're like, what's the half? And I'm like, you'll see. We'll get there. It's in the middle, so I don't want to spoil it. But if you want to become Jewish for whatever reason, maybe you're in a relationship with a Jewish person and it's getting serious, maybe it's just something you've been drawn to your entire life. It wasn't something you grew up with, but you've been drawn to it. I've talked to so many people like that. Whether your entire life is 20 years old or your entire life is 70 or 80 or 90 years old. But if you're drawn to being Jewish, as Rabbi Arson says, if your soul thirsts for Judaism, pay attention and check that out. And so that's another reason people might want to be Jewish. Some people, and I'm just going to be very upfront about this, some people ask if I'm a Messianic Jewish person because I have a last name that doesn't sound Jewish. And the answer is no. I'm a rabbi in the conservative movement, went to the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. I do not teach Messianic Judaism. I think it's a bit of a misnomer in the sense that Messianic Judaism is Christianity. It's Christian people who are interested in Jewish stuff. And I teach Jewish stuff to people who are Christian. But if anybody out there is interested in becoming Jewish because you think it will make you a better Christian, I have to say that from the Jewish perspective, that's not how it works. When somebody converts to Judaism, they have to, what part of the process is renouncing any connection to another religion that you might have. And so I just want to be very upfront and transparent about that. If you're coming to me to learn about being a Messianic Jew, I'm not your guy. There are other teachers out there for that. But let's say you really want to be Jewish. When as we think about being Jewish, a Jewish person, and you want to join the Jewish family, what's the first thing that you do? Well, the first thing that you have to do is start learning, right? Because, and I'll reflect on this a couple of times, in the Shulchan Aruch, that's the Jewish law code from the medieval period, it answers the question, like, what if somebody comes to you, Rabbi, and wants to be Jewish? Here's what you do. You say, first thing you do is, you teach them some of the mitzvot. You teach them some of the major mitzvot and some of the minor mitzvot. How to keep kosher, how to observe Shabbat, how to observe the holidays, and what do they mean. And so you teach them some of the mitzvot, and then you say, okay, there's a lot of rules, and sometimes things go badly for us. We haven't been the most loved population in the world in our 4,000 to 5,000 year history. And if you say to somebody like, look, it's hard, there's lots of stuff to do, and it's hard because sometimes people, a lot of times people don't like us, and sometimes people hurt us. And if that person says, yes, I know, and I'm not worthy, and I want to do it anyway, then the Shulchan Aruch says you convert that person immediately before they have a chance to change their mind, as my friend Rabbi John Hodson teaches it. So the first thing you need to do is learn. So I've got some comments and questions coming in right now. I'm going to get to some of those a little bit later in this. So you can comment, you can say hi to people all you want. I will stop for questions in a little while. So the first thing you need to do is learn about Judaism, learn the mitzvot, learn the commandments, learn about our holidays, learn about dietary laws, learn about interpersonal ethics, learn about family relations, sexual relations, learn about how to be a Jewish married person, learn about how we educate our children and raise people, raise our children, learn about what our responsibility is as, kind of partners in the ongoing creation of the world with Hashem, with God. So there's a lot of stuff to learn before you can be a part of the Jewish family. And sometimes people say this is a little bit unfair. They're like, well, I learn all this Jewish stuff. I know Jewish people who don't know all that stuff. And that's true. The Jewish people is incredibly diverse. Some people get a good education. Some people get a less good education in what it means to be Jewish. But I talk about it, it's a little bit like citizenship. So if you are joining a new country, for example, if you come from outside of the United States to the United States, you want to apply for citizenship to be a citizen and to have your children be citizens, then you have to take a test, right? You have to learn all about the Constitution. You have to learn all about the Declaration of Independence. You have to learn how our government works. You have to learn stuff that most born Americans may not have the opportunity to learn or take that seriously when they're in civics class and when they're in the 5th grade or whatever. So the fact is, if you're joining something, there can be a higher standard or higher expectation of learning than if you are born to it. So there's a lot of learning involved. I'm not gonna lie to you. And this part of the reason I'm so passionate about teaching this is because I converted to Judaism about 19 years ago with my rabbi back in Virginia. And I sat with him and some other people in his study for a year. Now, I didn't sit in the study for a year. I get to go to the bathroom and get stuff to eat. We actually met about once, every couple of weeks, and we discussed things that he gave us to learn. And then, after about a year of experiencing holidays and serious study, I became Jewish, right? And there's more steps to that, and we'll talk about that in a second. My wife also went through the process of converting to Judaism. She took a class over a period of time, learned everything that she needed to learn to make an informed decision to take on the mitzvot, and then she did. And then fast forward several years later, I became a rabbi after a few years of study, and now I teach that same kind of class. And that class takes about 18 weeks here in Los Angeles. People say, well, why is it 18 weeks and not, a full year? The fact is, most people who take that class have been sort of ingrained in the Jewish community for a long time already. Maybe they're dating a Jewish person, or maybe they've been going to synagogues for a long time. And the fact is, they've already experienced most of the holidays. That's what we found. So it can take a period of time, varies depending on who you're studying with. I've heard in Orthodox circles it takes up to 2 years or longer. And so it depends. But the number one thing is learning. And how do you do that? Well, the simplest, if not necessarily the easiest way, is to find a rabbi, is to connect with a rabbi at a synagogue, connect with a rabbi at a Jewish school, and say, hey, this is something I'm interested in. Will you teach me? And maybe that rabbi teaches you one-on-one, which is very close to what my experience was. Or maybe that rabbi introduces you to a class. In larger cities, there are very well-organized classes like the one that I teach now. And so those are different possibilities. Sometimes you don't necessarily have the rabbi first, but you find out about an Intro to Judaism class. And so that's another way. You can find that one's on the Miller Introduction to Judaism class. If anybody's in the Los Angeles area, this is the best curriculum for Intro to Judaism that I've ever seen. And if you have the means and the access to take that class live, I highly recommend that you do. It's also taught in a number of synagogues around the country. So look for that in your area. It's got Yelp reviews. It's the only Jewish class I know that has Yelp reviews, and which are overwhelmingly positive. So check that out. But the first step, just to circle back, is to learn about Judaism. And it's not just necessarily book learning, but also try the things that you learn. Try to experience Shabbat. Try out the dietary restrictions. See if you can keep kosher for a weekend or a week or a year. See if that's something that you can integrate, into your life. Don't just read about the holiday services. Go to the holiday services. Hear the shofar, right? Smell an etrog. That's a lemon-like thing. It's a citron. So it's actually a very pleasant thing to smell, in case you didn't know. So try all these things out and have your learning be not just a lecture or a book, but be embodied and experienced. Along that journey, you may decide you don't want to be Jewish. You may learn stuff. It's like, not for me. And that's okay. And you can keep learning and still not convert to Judaism. But if during that process you're like, yep, this is what I want to do, then what you need to do is find a rabbi to sponsor you. That is, if you don't already have a personal relationship with a rabbi, find a rabbi to form that personal relationship. It could be the rabbi that's teaching your Intro to Judaism class. It could be the rabbi or one of the rabbis at the synagogue that you visit, right? But go to that rabbi and say, look, I'm learning about Judaism right now. I'm on step 1. Making good progress. God willing, this is going to end in me going before a Beit Din, and I'd really like you to be my sponsor in that regard. I'd like you to help me find the Beit Din. The Beit Din for those of you who don't know, is a panel or a court of 3 rabbis who interview potential conversion candidates to see if they are sincere, to see if they are knowledgeable, that they're getting into this thing with their eyes wide open, and also to see if like your motives are pure. Some people have warned me. I've never personally experienced this, so I don't know how widespread it is. But sometimes people have warned me about, there are people who convert to Judaism with ulterior motives, like they think it's going to make them rich, or a Hollywood studio executive. I don't want to get too much into the cliches and stereotypes. Or they think that if they integrate into the Jewish community, they can connect with people and sort of proselytize them back to Christianity or whatever. I will say I've never experienced this personally. I've heard it happens, but that's part of the Beit Din's job, is to kind of screen that stuff out. And if you're one of these, I'll just say it, wackadoos who wants to kind of like secretly sneak into Judaism, 99 times out of 100, the rabbis will sniff that out. And if you do make it past the rabbis, your community will sniff that out very quickly. And so you will not be successful. So the purpose of the sponsor is to, kind of assess if you're ready, see if there are any gaps in your learning, see if there's questions that you have that maybe you don't feel like bringing up in your Intro to Judaism class. And that's okay. Like some of this stuff can get really personal, right? You could say, oh, I heard that about relationships. How does that affect my relationship with my spouse? And maybe I don't want to say that in front of 30 people in my class. And you can ask your sponsoring rabbi those personal questions in a safe space. So the sponsor is there to answer your questions one-on-one that maybe you don't get answered in class. The sponsor is there to make sure the class is working for you, right? Maybe the sponsor says, well, that's not the best class for you. Why don't you try this one over here? Why don't we work together to kind of fill in some gaps? Another big job for the sponsor is making sure you're ready, not just from your perspective, but also from the Beit Din's perspective, right? The sponsor could see that you're completely sincere, you're gung-ho, you're sort of emotionally ready, but they may know that there will be some question the Beit Din asks that you can't answer in a satisfactory way. And so once you're through with your learning, you can find the sponsor along your learning path. But once you're through with your learning, it's the sponsor's job to say, you are ready or you are not ready. And when both you and your sponsor agree that you are ready for the next step, then the sponsor can help you find the Beit Din. But not just yet. I said there were 4.5 steps. We're about to get to step number half after 2 steps. So this is sort of the 2.5th step. And it only applies to men. So if women who are watching, you can turn this off if you want to. Or maybe you're curious about it. It's a little bit immodest. If you are male, another step that you have to take is joining the covenant in a physical way. And this means that you have to undergo either Brit Milah or Hatafat Dam Brit. And both of those phrases are in Hebrew, so here goes. Brit Milah means the covenant of circumcision. That is, if you are not already circumcised, you have to be circumcised, and not just by, not merely by a medical procedure, but it has to be done in a way according to Jewish ritual law. And so the person who does the procedure, the doctor should be Jewish, and there should be appropriate blessings said when this happens. And so I'm not going to lie to you. There's a reason we prefer to do this when we're 8 days old, when men are 8 days old, because they heal faster and they don't remember it. Having it done as an adult is it's an inpatient surgical procedure that I've heard takes something like a month to recover from. But I've also talked to many, many converts who went through this experience as an adult and found it profoundly meaningful, right? The meaningfulness of it far outweighed the stress, let's say, or the pain or the recovery time or the unpleasantness of it. And so if this is something that you need to have done, talk to your sponsor. They'll be super sensitive about it, and they'll set you up with the right resources to make sure that that happens both in a medically safe way and also in a way that accords with the Jewish tradition. Let's see. Weirdly strange guy. I'm going to say the N word. So please don't. Please don't do that. So I'm sorry. I was just reflecting on the chat. I've seen some wackadoo stuff on the chat so far, but I wanted to call that out for safety reasons. So in any case, I mentioned another Hebrew phrase, and that is hatafat dam brit. If somebody is born, or excuse me, this came up in the Talmud a couple of about a millennium and a half ago. Some people are born without foreskin, or some men, I'll say, are born without foreskin. And how do you do that? How do you deal with that in terms of circumcision? So the rabbis came up with something called hatafat dam brit, which means taking a drop of blood for the covenant. And so if this is you, or if you had the medical procedure done as an infant or for at any time in your life, but let's say you're already taken care of in that regard, that doesn't mean you're off the hook, so to speak. And not that we use a hook; that would be terrible. But there is a procedure whereby someone takes a drop of blood from the penis, and that is sort of the circumcision equivalent for somebody who's already been circumcised. It takes 45 seconds and is painless, I can report. And so it's totally not a big deal. It's not like going to the hospital and laying in bed for a month. I'll say that. But it's something that most rabbis will insist on when you go to the Beit Din. And I say most because I'll just report the facts. Not 100% of Beit Din or rabbis insist on this element of conversion. Most do, and the tradition, the law says yes, and most rabbis will insist upon this. So if this is something you're nervous about, if this is something that is medically dangerous for you, talk to your rabbi and figure that out. So I can't answer that question for you. I'm just laying out all the traditional steps. So we've got step 1, learn about Judaism. Step 2, get a sponsor. Step 2.5 for dudes, gets either circumcised or take a drop of blood. Don't do this by yourself, by the way. You should consult somebody to make sure it's done right. Step number 3 is the Beit Din. Now, once you've done your learning, once you've got a sponsor and you and your sponsor agree that you are ready in all ways to join the Jewish family, and once, if you're a dude, you've gotten the covenant taken care of, then you go to a Beit Din. And this is something that your rabbi and your sponsoring rabbi can help you schedule. In some cities, there's a Beit Din that meets all the time. In Los Angeles, for example, the Beit Din meets 2 or 3 times. The Beit Din for conversion meets a day or 2 or 3 per week, just because there's so many people and such a large population converting to Judaism. But in some places, that might not be the case. In some places, to get 3 rabbis together, some of them might have to drive for a few hours. I'm thinking of like Alaska or something like that. But in whatever your case is, your sponsoring rabbi will help you convene a Beit Din, and these are 3 rabbis who ask you questions. And I'll say from my experience on the Beit Din and also as a sponsor observing Beit Din, the point is not to stump you, right? Depending on the movement of Judaism you're interested in, there may be a little bit more detail to the questions like that. I know that sometimes I scare. I'm a nice guy most of the time, but I joke around. Sometimes I'll say to my sponsee, "So, do you remember how many bulls we sacrifice on the 3rd day of Shavuot?" And they'll say, I don't know, I forgot that part. I was like, I'm just kidding. There aren't 3 days of Shavuot. So in any case, I do that to kind of break the ice and to set people at ease, that the rabbis are mostly looking for sincerity, right? That you are there for the right reasons, that you are sincere about making this major life step, and solidarity, that you are making this major life step to join a people who are then going to be responsible for you, right? And you're going to be responsible for them, right? It says in the Talmud that Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze B'Zeh, like all Jews are sort of, it says mixed together, but what it really means is like all Jews are responsible for one another. And so when you join this is a serious thing. So the rabbis are looking for sincerity, solidarity. They need to trust that you're not just doing this on a whim, that you're not being kind of pressured by anybody else, but you're doing this of your own free will. And that you have, not that you know all the facts, but that you've studied enough to know what you're getting into. Like I said, from the beginning of the Shulchan Aruch, it asks, do you know the mitzvot? Because you're going to be responsible for doing them. And do you know life sucks sometimes when you're Jewish, not to put too fine a point on it. So that's why part of the curriculum is usually Jewish history and the history, including the history of anti-Semitism and things like that, and the Holocaust and other terrible things. So the rabbis want to know that you know enough to make this decision of your own free will, that you're sincere about it, and that you're going to be there for us the way we're going to be there for you. My friend Vanessa asks in the chat, do they ask specific theological questions? I'll say in my Beit Din, the question is more like, so what do you think about God? In the sense that we are looking for a specific relationship with God or a specific thought about God. We're looking to see if someone has studied some things the Jews think about God, and that they've seriously thought about it, right? That they have at least wrestled with that topic, wrestled with God. That's the name of the people, Bnei Yisrael. And so, we'll ask not, give me all the details of the holidays, but what's your favorite holiday? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to the Jewish people? One rabbi I know likes to go through the different holidays and say, okay, not like how many cups of wine you have, although for Passover it's kind of important. It's 4, by the way. But he likes to ask, okay, what is the meaning of Passover? It's about redemption. It's about God hearing hearing our cry, remembering the covenant, taking us out of Egypt. And now we're a free people, and with that comes responsibilities, right? So it's an oral examination, if you will, but it's more to get to know you as somebody who's seeking to join our people, right? And so, it's not like a long true-false test. And in some communities, it may be a little different. Some communities might ask you some very particular questions, especially if they have a larger volume of learning that you're supposed to master before you get started. The fact is, no matter how much you master in 6 months or a year or 2 years, once you convert, you're still just at the beginning of the learning process. And so we like to make sure you know enough to know what you want to learn next. So that's by and large what goes on in a Beit Din. There are 3 rabbis there. Sometimes there are more, but there have to be at least 3. And Vanessa asked, does the Beit Din discuss the interview in private before making their decision? Is it majority rule? So I'll speak from my experience on the Beit Din that I've been on. And especially because we have such a great Intro to Judaism class here in Los Angeles, by the time people come to us, like a responsible sponsoring rabbi wouldn't bring a candidate to us unless that rabbi thought the candidate was a slam dunk. I'll just be very frank about that. And so 95% of the time, we just look at each other, and give a nod or a thumbs up. And we kind of agree verbally in the room, like, yeah, we're all good. Now, I'm going to say I've never seen it go to a vote of like 2 to 1. It's usually a unanimous decision. There are occasions where we might take a sidebar, and I've been on a couple of those where it's like, either I'm not sure this person knows what they're getting into, I'm not sure their home life kind of lends itself to taking on Jewish responsibilities, things like that. So sometimes we'll just say, and we're really chill about it. We'll just look at each other and say, okay, I think we're going to talk about it for a little bit. Please wait, and we'll call you back in for our decision, so that we can do that in private. 9 times, when I went to my Beit Din, I told my story. I answered a particular question, and one rabbi was just like, all right, get in the water, right? Like, I'm convinced, go ahead. And the other rabbi said, yes, he's fine with us. And so most of the time it's like that. And it takes, again, depending on your Beit Din, Most of the time it takes like in 30, 45 minutes, something like that, maybe an hour. Sometimes it's just a great conversation as we're getting to know somebody with a great story who's had a great journey. And the Beit Din is also there to answer the questions of the potential convert. Like if we say, okay, you got 3 rabbis in the room, what questions do you have? And we'll give you at least 5 opinions about it. Just kidding. Not really. Not every day you get to have 3 rabbis in the same room that you can ask questions to. So we're like a certifying body, kind of an interview committee, but we're also a teaching committee and like a welcoming committee. And so, we get to be the first person to shake somebody's hand after they've passed that discussion. Let's see. Vanessa asked, if the person's rejection... I'm sorry, I'm just going to Vanessa, but she's asking all these questions right when I'm paying attention to questions. If the person is rejected, is there a set time needed before going back to the Beit Din? I'm going to say, not according to Hoyle's Book of Card Game rules. Like, if the person's not ready, that's a real time to reevaluate whether the person will ever be ready. But that's really a discussion with them and their rabbi, and maybe the Beit Din might make some recommendations to their sponsor and say, here's where this person fell short. Here's where this person would need to resolve some issues or come to a different understanding. This is relatively rare in my experience, but I don't think there's any set time. It's like it's not like, okay, you got a 6-month cooling off period. So it really comes down to the Beit Din, and really comes down to the individual and things like that. So Judaism is a small world. There's not a lot of law of averages here, and everything is very much on the personal level between the candidate and their sponsoring rabbi and the Beit Din. So that's step number 3. We've done 1, learn something about Judaism. 2, get a sponsor. 2.5, if you're a dude, have a drastic or trivial medical procedure. 3, schedule some time with the Beit Din, have a conversation with them. And once they are through the Beit Din's job is to say, okay, yes, this person satisfies us to his or her sincerity, solidarity, and knowledgeability and full consent. Now it's just, there's one more procedural thing to do, and that's number 4, go to a mikvah. So a mikvah, the word mikvah in Hebrew just means gathering. So it's a gathering of waters. And that, again, it's a very generic term, but it's kind of a generic thing. Sometimes the mikveh is a specially constructed pool that meets the minimum dimensions that the rabbis have laid out for us. It's enough water that there's a specific measurement in the Talmud, but generally speaking, it's enough water that a person could fully immerse their body and take their feet up off the ground, and so they're floating there for a second, and you can just float in the sense. So let's say, for example, not to put too much of an image in your mind, but I went just for spiritual cleansing reasons to a mikveh the other day, and I'm not a small dude. I'm about 6'2" and a lot of pounds, and I went to a mikveh, and the water came up about to my chest, and it was easy for me to just kind of take a hop off the bottom of the pool and fall into the water and be completely surrounded. But the notion is that when you go into a mikveh, and so I said it's a constructed pool, it could also be a natural body of water. It could be a river, it could be a lake, it could be the Pacific Ocean, although the Pacific Ocean is terribly cold, so I recommend the Atlantic, and things like that. Maybe the Caribbean is kind of comfortable. The point is that it has to be a gathering of waters, and it's waters that we call mayim chaim, like living waters. So and by living waters, we don't mean with bacteria and fish and stuff like that. We mean it's water that has to come from a natural source. And so if you go to the ocean or a river or a lake, that's water from a natural source. If you go to a constructed pool, the pool might have some proportion of, I'll say it, tap water, right? Stuff in the pipe, but it has to have a certain proportion of water that is from a natural source, collected rainwater, river, stuff like that. A lot of places, they have a cistern where they gather rainwater and they use that for the mikveh. At the American Jewish University, it's constructed in such a way that they can't use rainwater, and so they actually bring in giant blocks of ice. This was from the ruling of Rabbi Benzion Bergman, who said, frozen water, once it thaws, is considered living water according to our law. And so they would bring in blocks of ice, let it melt, and that became the living water for the mikveh. Don't worry, they crank up the heat in the room, so by the time you get in there, it's not like being in ice water, I promise. So that's a good way to go. And then, so when you go to the mikveh, whether it's in the ocean, the other nice thing about pools is there's the particular mikveh, constructed mikveh, is there's a lot more privacy, I'll say, than the Pacific Ocean. Just putting that out there. You won't get a ticket for public indecency. So you make an appointment, you go to the mikveh. Often the Beit Din meets in a place that's right next to the mikveh, so you can go straight from your Beit Din to the mikveh, and you don't have to wait. I could foresee circumstances where you can't get the rabbis close together where a mikveh is. For example, I've heard of people who live in Alaska. Sometimes there's a mikveh available, sometimes there's not. So they'll have a Beit Din of rabbis in Alaska, then they fly to Seattle for the mikveh. Different circumstances. Most of the time, in my experience, the rabbis actually meet you at the mikveh for your Beit Din, and then you go right into the mikveh. And the custom, at least here in Los Angeles, is that the person immerses fully in the mikveh 3 times. I forgot one very important step to getting in the mikveh, and that is you have to get down to as natural a state as you possibly can. That means you go not in a bathing suit, but in your birthday suit. So when you go into the mikveh, you're supposed to be completely nude. Many mikvahot will have kind of a shower room outside, and you're supposed to shake a shower, brush your teeth. They say, like, look, don't get your nails done right before that because they have nail polish remover. You're supposed to take off all makeup, take off all nail polish, take off all jewelry, anything that can be basically removed from your body safely without surgery. You have to remove. Like sometimes people get in with braces, and that's okay because you can't take braces off without, get them chipped off in a doctor's office for a couple of hours. But if it's earrings, yes. Like if you have, I'll just say, if you have, say, a prosthetic arm, then you would remove that before going to the mikveh. But if you have some sort of surgical implant that's a prosthesis, but you can't take that out without risking your life, then you keep that in, okay? But for most people, it just means taking a shower, brushing your teeth, getting your nail polish off, taking the braids out of your hair, taking jewelry off, and you go into the mikveh as close to your natural state as the day you were born. And then you get in the mikveh, you immerse 3 times. Now, I'll say per strict letter of the law, if you do it once, you're Jewish, but we like to do it 3 times. And so at our mikveh, a person immerses once and then comes out and says 2 blessings. And that is, the first one is a blessing. We bless God for giving us the commandment for tevilah, that is immersing in the mikveh. Technically speaking, after the person's immersed once, they can say that blessing because they're Jewish. Then they would say the Shehechianu blessing, and that's Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. That's the blessing that we say at momentous occasions in our lives, and we bless God who gave us life and kept us strong and allowed us to reach this important moment. We also say that in holidays and things like that, so you might have heard that one before. But we say that at mikveh because that's a momentous life occasion that at most happens once in somebody's life. And then the person will immerse for a second time. And then after the third time they immerse, when they come up, and again, this is the custom in Los Angeles, it might be different where you are. After the third time they come up, they say the Shema. They say the 6-word blessing that's Devarim, Sefer Devarim, or the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 4, where we say, hear Israel, the Lord is our God, and that God is one. And as one of my colleagues likes to say, when you get out of the water for the first time, this may be the very first blessing you learned. This may be because this is like the first blessing or prayer that children learn. And so the person, if they've been in a synagogue at all, they really know that one by heart. But this is the first time saying it as a Jewish person. And that could be, I'm going to tear up a little bit, that could be really heavy. Like that can be a momentous experience. And I actually was on a Beit Din where an entire family of people from Nigeria came to go through Beit Din, and then they went to the mikveh, and the way the woman said the Shema, and I didn't see it. I don't witness. Let me back up for a second. Because you're naked, we do like to preserve modesty, and so the witnesses for the mikveh are usually people of the same gender as the person getting in the mikveh. And so if you're a woman, there will be a mikveh lady there who is just there to witness the fact that your hair goes. She doesn't like peep at you or anything. She's just there to make sure your head goes all the way under the water. You don't have any hair sticking out or something. And then she shouts over to us behind a curtain in the same room, but behind a curtain where we can't see anything. That immersion was kasher. It was kosher. Okay, on to the next one. And so anyway, I was behind the curtain. There was a woman from Africa, a mother of 3 children, who also went to the mikveh that day. And the way she said the Shema in this beautiful singing voice just took my breath away. And pretty much every time it takes my breath away when a brand new Jew says the Shema for the first time as a Jew. I'm sorry, again, I'm getting a little emotional. That's like the heaviest experience for me anytime that happens. So enough about me. That's it. Like, those are the 4 steps, the 4.5 steps, right? We have learn about Judaism. You've got to learn. There's a lot to learn. And we'll talk for a second here at the end after I take some questions about one particular tool that might help you do that. First, you learn something. Then you get a sponsor, right? While you're in the process of learning something. That sponsor, if you are male, will direct you to either Brit Milah or Hatafat Dam Brit, either a full circumcision or a sort of symbolic circumcision with just a drop of blood if you're a dude. I don't want to check. I've gotten this question before. If somebody is transgender and they want to convert, is it your chromosomal gender or is it your identity gender? And to clarify, it applies to anybody who has a penis. So if you have a penis, this thing has to be into it however it is you identify in the world. That's just how it is at sort of the state of the art right now. And so that's a thing that roughly half the people go through. And then you go to a Beit Din. And if you and your sponsor agree you're ready, you go to the Beit Din. If you and your sponsor in the Beit Din agree that you're going to be good for the Jewish people and the Jewish people are going to be good for you, then it's time. Then it's just a sort of a formality, but not just a formality, but a pretty heavy moment, I'll say, spiritually, because it's a very embodied thing. If it sounds a little bit like baptism, where do you think they got it? So that's just how it is, right? As Rabbi Greenwald teaches, John the Baptist his name was probably actually John the Mikvah, like mikvah guy. So that's where that came from. And when you go to the mikveh, you are Jewish. And you are just as Jewish as if you had been born Jewish. There is no distinction in Jewish law in terms of rights, privileges, responsibilities, whether the law applies to you in certain cases, or whether you're allowed to lead or become a rabbi or become this or that. You are no different from a born Jew. And it's considered not only rude, but against Jewish law for people to call you out for being a convert in a way that embarrasses you. It's okay for people to talk about it because it's an interesting thing and it's a momentous life decision. And some people really like talking about it. But no one is allowed to embarrass you for it. And that's I believe that's in the Talmud Bava Metzia B, I think Bava Metzia B and Onat Devarim. It's like my favorite section, one of my favorite sections for a lot of reasons, but that's another video. So anyway, you are fully Jewish. There is a question that the Rambam, Maimonides, is asked by one of his students, Ovadia the proselyte. And so he was a proselyte, right? He converted to Judaism, and his name was Ovadia, and he picked back then, 1,000 years ago, a lot of converts were named Ovadia, because Ovadia was a prophet who was also a convert. And so Ovadia writes him a letter and says, Rabbi, we have all these prayers that say, Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avotenu. Like, we have all these prayers that say, our God and God of our fathers. Does this apply to me too? Because my father was Polish Catholic, or my father was a Southern Baptist, or, am I lying? Should I skip that prayer? And Rambam, not, from Yid, right? A very religious Jew said, you should absolutely not skip that prayer. Abraham is your father, just as sure as Abraham is my father, in the sense of kind of our forefather, our first ancestor, our patriarch. And just like Abraham, basically everybody in his household, even though Abraham was technically sort of the first Jew, everybody in his household became Jewish by dint of being a follower of him, rather, being a follower of God under the care of Abraham. And so, in that sense, Abraham is just as much the father of the convert as the father of the born Jew. And so, I just want to, if anybody had that question, I want to set your mind at ease that Maimonides, going back to the Talmud about 1,500 years, it was, and even the Mishnah before that, it was considered forbidden to embarrass somebody about their convert status. Still is. Doesn't mean everybody's perfect. There are speed limits because people speed. But Maimonides, one of our greatest legal scholars and thinkers from 1,000 years ago, agreed with that decision. So that's how you become Jewish. So let me jump into the chat. There's been a lot of great activity in the chat. There's been some wackadoo stuff too. I saw some dude said it's not possible to convert to Judaism, and I admire your fedora, sir, but you're wrong, and that's not consistent with Jewish history or law. Oh gosh, Larry, thank you so much. Larry posed. So, but anyway, I'm going to jump back into the questions. I'm going to kind of take them backwards. Larry, who I know through the Jewcurious School, says Rabbi didn't mention choosing a Hebrew name. So I'm sorry I skipped over this. I'll say it's not necessarily a legal requirement because you are Jewish whether you have a Hebrew name or not, right? However, it is a traditional step along the way, especially for modern conversions, and a significant one. So I'm really glad you brought that up, Larry. Along the path, before you go to the Beit Din, you will choose for yourself a Hebrew name, right? Children who are born into religious communities during their circumcision, their Brit Milah, or during a Simchat Bat or a naming of a baby girl, their parents pick a name for them in Hebrew. Now, if you're Israeli or if you're in a very religious community where people all have biblical names anyway, and they go by the Hebrew, so your name on your driver's license might not be different from your name in Hebrew. But if you are, let's say, in kind of middle America, typical Jewish community, your name might be Scott, but your Hebrew name might be Shmuel, for example. And then it follows the custom of the Hebrew patronymic, meaning that traditionally Jews never had last names. That was something that we started doing in Germany a few hundred years ago because they needed to tax us. And so they said, you have to have a last name or, you can't live here. So the traditional Jewish name is a person's name, Ben so-and-so, where so-and-so is either their father or both of their parents, or that's if it's a dude. Ben means son. If it's a woman, it's Bat. So it's Rachel Bat so-and-so, like Rachel, daughter of these parents. And so, my son has a Hebrew name that's his Hebrew name, son of my Hebrew name and his mother's Hebrew name. However, I didn't get a Hebrew name when I was born. It wasn't really relevant to my life because my family was Lutheran. So when I converted, I got to pick my own name, right? I got to pick my own Hebrew name. And if you want to know what it is, come to my shul sometime and you'll hear it if I get called up for an aliyah. So I got my Hebrew name, but my parents were Jewish. So who am I ben of? The tradition is for us to call converts son or daughter of Avraham and Sarah, right? That is the first Jewish couple. Avram Avinu, Abraham our father, and Sarah Imenu, Sarah our mother. So let's say, for example, my Hebrew name is Shmuel. It's not, but let's just go with that. I would be Shmuel ben Avraham Sarah, right? And I've got a friend who picked the Hebrew name Shlomo. because it means Solomon, and it's a name that implies wisdom and art and truth. And so he is now Shlomo ben Avraham Vasara. And so that's how it works. But the cool part, that's just the technicality. That's not even the cool part. The cool part is like how often do you get to pick the name of anything? Like most of the time, you got to get a dog, or you have to have kids, which is much more expensive than getting a dog, or you have to have a boat, which is arguably more expensive than having kids. But how often do you get to pick your own name, right? Like almost never, right? If somebody, maybe you're in a new school or something and you're like, oh, I don't want to be John anymore. Everybody call me Tex, or everybody call me the Fonz or something. You don't get to do that often. Some people legally change their names for various reasons. But when you get this name, and what's the significance of the Hebrew name? The Hebrew name is the one that you were called during holy occasions. If somebody calls you up to read the Torah or calls you up to say the blessing over the reading of the Torah, they call you by your Hebrew name because that's the name that you are known as among Bnei Yisrael, among the children of Jacob. And so that's a significant thing. That's the name that would go on a ketubah, right? On a marriage certificate. That's the name that would go on a get, on a divorce certificate, incidentally. Not encouraging it necessarily, but it happens. But in any holy context, that's the name that you have. And to pick that is a powerful experience. And so some people pick the name of a person in the Torah that they really admire, right? Some people pick nature names like Tamar. Well, Tamar is a tough one because Tamar is a person, sort of a heroine of the Torah, and also a type of produce, right? It's like a date palm or something like that. Or is it fig? I always get those mixed up. Maybe it's a fig. I forget. Something that's not in season right now. But but you can pick like a nature name or a name that is a character from the Torah, or you can pick a name that has a value like strength or truth that you want to be known by. And that's something you can do in conversation with your sponsor. There are Jewish baby name books full of Hebrew names that you could choose from, or you could just pick something from a Torah story that you've heard before. My rabbi's name is Tamar. Mazel tov. I know some wonderful rabbis and not rabbis named Tamar. So, sorry, I just got not having an episode. I'm just calling out what somebody said in the chat. So you pick your name. That would happen before the Beit Din. Sometimes one of the questions the Beit Din asks is, "How did you pick your name?" Because answering that question actually tells the Beit Din a lot about you and what your values are, or what Torah episodes you're attracted to, what you want to see and express for your Jewish future. So all sorts of different reasons to choose a name. I would, pick it, but also, do it in conversation with your sponsoring rabbi. I've had a couple of moments at the mikvah, or rather at the Beit Din, that happened right before the mikvah, where somebody like read an interesting name that they thought would be nice. And one of the rabbis was like, that means shoes, right? Or they were cooler than that about it. It wasn't like, they didn't like call them out. They're like, that means shoelace or something. It's like, that means like fishmonger. You don't want that. Like, and then the person, we give them some options on the spot. So do that in conversation with your sponsoring rabbi, and be prepared to answer the question why you picked the Hebrew name that you picked, because the Beit Din will be the first to ask you that, but probably not the last. So let's go. I'm going to go back to some questions here. Somebody's going to Shabbat at West London Synagogue next week for the first time. That's cool. Say hi for me. I don't know anybody there, but give him a high five from John in the States. Let's see. My daughter has my grandmother's Hebrew name to honor her since she passed away. That's another great reason to pick a name. To pick a name of somebody who you respect. This is more to do with naming babies, less about conversion. But let's say you had a Jewish person in your life who made a big impact on you, that you might consider having their name for a Hebrew name. So I'm going to be taking questions now. So listen, I've been blown away at how much activity we've had in the chat. I'm certainly not going to get to all of it, but I'm going to sort of work my way backwards and forwards and answer as many questions as I can before we stop. I mentioned the whole family converting earlier. When I converted, what does my toddler do to be recognized as Jewish? This is an interesting question. And somebody else asked the question, is it possible to convert if you're married and your spouse is not converting with you. This is something to take up with your sponsoring rabbi, because I've seen this go a couple of different ways. Some rabbis don't like to convert somebody who is not who's in a relationship with somebody who's not Jewish and not intending to be Jewish, because they consider that as kind of creating an intermarriage, if you will. Like, they wouldn't do that kind of wedding, so they don't want to make that kind of wedding ex post facto. That's kind of problematic to me. I find that if if I trust the person who's actually converting, I would consider sponsoring them for conversion, even if I knew their spouse wasn't going to convert, but the spouse was supportive of the decision, and that they were in agreement about how they were going to raise their kids if they had kids, or maybe they weren't going to have kids, and then it wouldn't be an issue of raising kids. I think about it in a lot of terms of like how people would raise kids if they have kids. But I've sponsored people who were married and their spouse wasn't Jewish, one because they weren't going to have any kids, and one because I knew that the kids were going to have a Jewish like a pretty much exclusively Jewish education. And so that I'm just calling that out because that happens. Some rabbis will shy away from that. Some rabbis will not. And so that's something to raise with your sponsoring rabbi. Communities are different. We're very diverse people. So that's the case there. If you're converting and you have young children, like I said, this was a family of a grown-up couple, husband and wife, and 3 little kids, 5 and under. And so we had a Beit Din for the parents, and the Beit Din it's usually one at a time. Like, we don't do a lot of couple or group Bate Din because we really feel that it has to be an individual choice, right, to convert to Judaism. Even if 2 people are doing it at the same time, it's not their couple responsibility, it's each individual's responsibility. So the couple came in and did their Beit Din separate from one another. Besides, when you have 3 kids, one of you got to go watch the kids. But with kids who are under the age of bar mitzvah, we'll do mikvah, but not Beit Din. So kids, before their age of bat mitzvah, that's 12 for girls, 13 for boys. That's something that their parents can do on their behalf. And then if somebody gets converted as a minor, at their bar mitzvah or at their bat mitzvah or at that age, we ask them, like, okay, this is something that happened to you under your parents' care. Now you're responsible for yourself in terms of Jewish law. Do you want to keep being Jewish, right? And if they say no, then we say, oh, well, then it never happened, and so you don't have those responsibilities anymore, right? Because now that you have responsibility and you're choosing not to, that's on you, right? But if you say, yes, I'm going to keep being Jewish, then we don't have to redo the whole process. This happens a lot in terms of adoption, like when a baby is adopted as an infant or was through surrogacy. It also happens when somebody converts and they have young children, right? Up to who knows how old. Once somebody is 12 or 13, they need to go through the process of a Beit Din. But if you convert and you have a toddler and you want that toddler and you plan to raise that toddler as a Jew, then that Beit Din will say, okay, well, as long as you're at the mikveh, we can put the toddler in as well. Same rules, have to take the diaper off and hope nothing goes wrong. I've never seen that happen, actually. Usually, take care of business beforehand. But you take a toddler in a mikveh, or you take a baby in a mikveh. I think the youngest baby I've seen in a mikveh, it was like 12 days old. And the good news is they just came out of the water. Now, if there's something with the child that medically they can't do that, then you wait. But most of the time, it's fine. I'll say after 18 months, kids can get a little bit freaked out about it. Doesn't mean we don't do it. It just means sort of be prepared for that. So some kids like being in the water, some kids don't. Some kids are shy about being naked, some kids aren't. Some kids really aren't. And so that's kind of up to you, but that's the procedure. Now, if anybody has this question, I don't know if anybody does, if you are pregnant, if you're a woman and you are pregnant and you get in the mikveh before the baby comes out, once that baby is born, that baby is considered born Jewish, right? Because in Jewish law, a person isn't a person until they leave the womb. And so If the womb, if the womb is Jewish, anything that comes out of it is Jewish, even if they were already, occupying the space beforehand. There was actually one summer where I had sponsored 3 different women who were pregnant, purely by coincidence, and so and some of them were like in a hurry. They were like 9 months and change, and they're like, "Can I get in the mikvah now?" I was like, "Okay, you're ready. The Beit Din will see you. Let's do this." And then they had the baby like a few days later. They had a nice Jewish baby a few days later. So I hope I answered that question. Lol, I was Lutheran too. Go, Lutherans, I guess. I don't know what our mascot is. I'm not a Lutheran anymore, but I don't, let's see. Mention a Hebrew name. Would an Orthodox rabbi accept a conservative or Reform Jewish convert? So I'm really glad you asked this. Somebody, when I talked in my video about how to do this before, somebody, I believe it was Elizabeth, raised the question, like, why is there, if we're considered one family, why are there different standards for conversion? So I want to be really upfront about this. If anybody's concerned about this or has a different opinion about this, I respect your opinion. I'm going to kind of call it how I see it right now. So, as it stands, for someone to convert to Judaism, they need to satisfy a Beit Din of the community that they are hoping to be a part of, right? And so typically, well before you convert, kind of what community you've been to a couple of synagogues. You've talked to hopefully more than one rabbi, and you know where you're going to be. And so it's like, look, if you feel strongly that you're going to be a part of the Reform community, you should seek out a Beit Din of Reform rabbis, right? Because these are the leaders, these are the teachers of the community where you're going to hang your Jewish hat, as it were. I don't know if it's yarmulke or some other hat. If you feel strongly about being a part of the conservative community, go to conservative rabbis, right? Because I'll say there may be a couple of fine details where the standards are different, but for the most part, not. The fact is, conservative rabbis do things according to the Shulchan Aruch the same way the Orthodox rabbis do. Orthodox rabbis don't necessarily see it the same way. And so typically, if you want to be a part of an Orthodox community, you should go have your Beit Din with Orthodox rabbis. Because the fact is, and again, I don't want to paint a broad picture because I know of diversity within the Orthodox community. I know diversity among Orthodox rabbis, right? And they may say, well, our party line is we don't recognize any conversion done by conservative rabbis or Reform rabbis or reconstructing rabbis or what have you, only Orthodox rabbis. Individual rabbis might, in individual communities, based on their experience, based on their community, may have a different answer. By and large, I will say that Orthodox rabbis don't accept the conversion of Jews who studied with and were converted by a Beit Din of other rabbis. The reason is they don't regard non-Orthodox rabbis, as legitimate, qualified rabbis to sit on a Beit Din. So it's nothing wrong with you. It's entirely interdenominational rabbinic politics. And so, that's my perspective. You can send me a bunch of hate mail, fill up the chat if you want to. I've been doing this a long time. I can take it. So the fact is, though, if you want to be a part of an Orthodox community, you should absolutely go to an Orthodox rabbi and say, what kind of learning should I do? Because the process is a little different. And I just know this kind of third hand in Orthodox circles. You have to go to the Beit Din before you start studying, right? You have to go to a court of rabbis and ask permission to start the learning process, because they may not want you to convert no matter what, and so you'd be wasting your time learning. I've heard of and again, this isn't a broad brush. This is one incident. I've heard of a Beit Din rejecting a woman for conversion not because of her learning, but because she was past childbearing age. And they're like, well, what are you going to add to the Jewish community? Again, this is one horrible story, not a broad projection by any stretch of the imagination. But you go to a Beit Din. Once you're approved for study, then you'll study for 2 years or more, and then you'll go back to the Beit Din. and then they will interview you. A lot of times they'll check your kitchen to make sure you're keeping kosher according to their standards. They'll pop in on you on Shabbos to make sure you're observing Shabbat the way they want you to. And then they may or may not accept you for conversion, or they may say go back to the drawing board. And that's a fact. And so a lot of people are convinced that, well, if I'm going to be Jewish and I don't know what I want to be, I might as well go through the Orthodox conversion because anybody will accept my Jewishness. And that's true. If I knew somebody converted with Orthodox rabbis, for the most part, unless I suspected that it was a hinky Orthodox Beit Din, most of the time that's not true. But for the most part, if somebody said to me they converted with Orthodox rabbis and they wanted to be a part of a conservative community, I'd be like, fine, right? I know they have very high standards. If a conservative convert went to an Orthodox community, they may say, well, gosh, we're really glad you want to be a part of this community, but if you want me to do your wedding, you might need to take some additional time and meet our standards as well. And so what I want to go on record and fully reject here on YouTube Live is the people who say that if you don't convert with an Orthodox Beit Din, you are not Jewish, because historically, factually, that is not true. The Orthodox movement in America is a minority that doesn't get to decide who is Jewish in this country. The Orthodox authorities in Israel do have a lot of political power because of the coalition government there, and so I don't want to cast any aspersions on Orthodoxy whatsoever. I do want to disagree with people who say if you're not Orthodox, you're not legitimately a Jew, because most of the Jews in America are not, and they live fully committed, devoted Jewish lives. So sorry to get on a high horse there for a second, but I see a lot of crazy stuff that hurts people being spouted on the internet, and I wanted to go to the mat for it. So the punchline is, for whatever community you want to be a part of, talk to rabbis in that community and find the right path that it works for you. Somebody asked, please, Rabbi, I have a question. I work as a cleaner, listen to lectures on MP3. When I clean the toilet rooms, I pause the lecture, so do I need to pause my learning? This is a fascinating question, Bradley. It reminds me of there's sort of an old theologian's joke, because I've heard this in Jewish circles and also in not Jewish circles. Rabbi, is it okay to smoke while I'm praying? And the rabbi would say, absolutely not. Of course you can't. Smoking is a disgusting habit. It's asur l'halacha because it hurts your body. Of course you can't smoke while you're praying. And then the person says, aha, but can I pray while I'm smoking? Of course, it's always a good time to pray. So if you're smoking and you have to be smoking, it's a disgusting habit. But if you feel motivated to talk to Hashem, go right ahead. So it's kind of a conundrum. Typically, we don't, let's say if somebody's cleaning a toilet, or if somebody's going to the bathroom. So for example, in a house, we don't put mezuzahs on the bathroom door. Because that first, we only really need to put mezuzahs in places where we sleep, because that's what it means to dwell somewhere. And if you don't sleep in the bathroom, don't put a mezuzah there. Also, just because, sort of going back to the mission of the proximity of human waste isn't something that we like to mix with holy thoughts and things like that. That's why we leave a talit outside, because the talit might have the name of God printed on it, and we don't want to have that in the presence of possible presence of human waste. And so I'll say, if you're, and one more thing, we also have a bracha. We have the bracha blessing called the Sher Yetzar. We bless God who creates our bodies in magnificent ways. That is a thing that we say after we go to the bathroom. But we don't say it until after we leave the bathroom. And so I'll say, let's say you're listening to a Torah lecture, on your iPod, and you go in to clean a bathroom, put it on pause. Maybe you could think about it. Judaism doesn't control a lot what people think, only what people do and say. But you could think about it. But it's best not to be hearing Torah read or reading Torah. It's like you don't take your Chumash. If your custom is to read in the bathroom, I don't judge. Don't take your Torah in there. Don't take holy books in there. I would think on the same vein. It's not like you have to leave your iPod outside if it's attached to you. But I would say, put it on pause, the Daf Yomi Shiur, put it on pause, the Torah lecture, put on some Bon Jovi, put on some Red Hot Chili Peppers, put on some Salt and Pepper. This is exactly how old I am. Listen to that. Uh, if you're listening to a podcast about some silly guy talking to another rabbi and they're not necessarily talking about holy stuff, plug Jewcurious Show. You don't necessarily maybe have to pause that, but don't be listening to like scripture or really deep stuff. Put on some music, do what you need to do in the bathroom, whether that's personally or professionally, and then resume your studies after you leave that space. And that's not like just black letter law, because there aren't any iPods in black letter law, but that's just intentionality and mindfulness, right? Sort of focus on holy things when you can control the space and maintain holiness. And yet when you're engaged in things that are a necessity of human life but don't necessarily mix with the spirit, separate those two things. And that could be part of your Jewish mindfulness. Boy, we've been going for about 70 minutes now. I want to go through, see if there are any new questions that came up. Toda Rabbi, I've been pausing. It's a very weird scenario. I don't know which scenario you're talking about, but there's a lot of weird scenarios. Let's see. Orthodox in Dublin told me I wasn't for them, but were very helpful. So sometimes rabbis will say, like, look, this isn't for you. And that's okay. They're doing you a favor, right? Because if they think, it's actually going to hurt your life to be Jewish. That was the other thing we were talking about couples. Like, if somebody comes to me and wants to convert and they're married to somebody who's not going to convert, and I know that other spouse is going to give them a hard time, or that choice to convert, as sincere as the person is going to hurt their marriage, I would say, look, you're not ready. You need to sort this out, because God forbid Judaism hurts your marriage, because marriage is a Jewish value. Like having a committed relationship that's healthy is a Jewish value. And so get your relationship healthy, get on the same page, and then come back. Let's see. Somebody says, let's see, conservative rabbi would accept Orthodox conversion, but not necessarily vice versa. I think we answered that question. Let's see. This has been a fantastic discussion, everybody. Whole family converting. Trolls left, I think. That's why it's fun to do an hour long, because people just get sick of shouting. Orthodox rabbi, let's see. How early do you get a sponsor? Good question, Vanessa. Vanessa's taking the trophy today. Lots of good questions. Get a sponsor when you're sure you want to convert, right? That doesn't mean you can't talk to a rabbi. It might be a good idea to talk to somebody who might be your sponsor if you're on the fence. But say, like, look, Rabbi, I'm thinking about this, but there's really no role for a sponsor unless you're sure you want to be Jewish, right? And then it's the sponsor's job to see if he or she can agree with you and that they think you should be Jewish also, if it's going to be good for you and good for the Jewish people. But I will say, talk to rabbis, talk to your teachers all through the process, but consider getting a sponsor once you are sure that this is a step that you want to take. And look, you can do a lot of learning before you take that step. I studied with a rabbi for a year, 100% convinced that I did not want to be Jewish, or rather 100% convinced that I wasn't going to convert, because I was an agnostic. I was an atheist. I was like, I love everything about this, but I don't necessarily believe in the God as God was explained to me when I grew up. And somebody said, that's okay. A lot of us are atheists. And then that made me kind of rethink things. I'll just say, put this out there. My answer is very different now. I very much believe in God and feel like very close to Hashem. But I'll say, this is just to say that I went through my entire study pretty sure that I wasn't going to convert. And then some things changed that made me realize that it was the right path for me. And so at that point, I asked the rabbi to sponsor me to the Beit Din. So once you know it's a step you want to take, a lot of times happens, especially spouses of Jewish people will take the class just to take the class, just so they can answer their kids' questions and feel like they're part of the family, And then halfway through, something happens. This has happened to me on multiple occasions, where I had a student who had a Jewish spouse, and so they were taking the Intro to Judaism program. And halfway through, it's different for everybody, but something just clicked. So I'll say, like, look, if you're thinking about maybe sort of wanting to be Jewish, take a class and be open to the possibility, but don't like put all your eggs in that basket. Like, you may take the whole class and say, you know what, this is not for me. And in that case, you've taken a great class, you've learned a lot, and you've avoided a path that might not have been good for you. So let me see. Can I convert? My spouse isn't Jewish, but super supportive of my decision to convert. That's Kate's question. I'll just restate that. Can I convert if my spouse isn't Jewish, but super supportive of my decision to convert? So I'll say, yes, you can, but not every rabbi will. So I addressed that earlier. It really depends on the community that you're in, the rabbis that you're talking to. There's actually a very active discussion on a rabbi Facebook group today about this very issue, and some rabbis feel very strongly in favor of it. Some rabbis feel very strongly against it. Pretty much all of us agree, though, that it has to go to a case-by-case basis. And so I think it's a possibility for you. It's something to explore with your spouse and with your rabbi, and at some point with the Beit Din that you're talking to if you decide you want to convert. Let's see. So I actually have a fear of water / floating. That's going to be fun for the rabbi. Okay, it's a thing. I know. Like I said, I've heard of some rabbis who, will say, not necessarily with this adult circumcision. I don't know a rabbi who would allow someone to convert without mikvah. If you need to take some tranquilizers or something, that sounds very unsafe. But look, if you are medically allergic to water, that sounds like a hard thing, but there could be some discussion. But talk to your rabbi. They could have strategies for you. Let's see. Somebody says, I'm a student. That's money I don't have. That's also true. It's not cheap a lot of times. I just want to address that reality that classes can be expensive. The Beit Din often, not always, has a cost associated with it because you're taking rabbis who have jobs at synagogues and things like that and asking them for an hour or two of their day, and maybe they need that money to donate back to the synagogue for their time. Taking classes, you have to pay teachers. There are often considerations. So I'll say for anybody who's concerned about the money thing, sometimes if you go to your rabbi, the rabbi might have some charity money that somebody's given them, and they could pass that on to the Beit Din. Mikvah often also has a cost associated with it because it's a building that has to be maintained and water that has to be cleaned and purified and all. And you got to buy shampoo, true fact, and people who work there have to get paid. So a lot of these things, classes, Beit Din, Mikvah, do have costs associated with them, and sometimes it can look kind of steep. If that, what thing are you going to commit to in your life doesn't have some sort of sacrifice associated with it if it's worthwhile. I will say most Intro to Judaism classes is way cheaper than you can get a great sort of college level overview of Judaism without paying college tuition. But here's the thing. If your heart is moving in that direction, but it's just insurmountable for you, talk to your sponsors, talk to other people. There might be scholarship money available, things like that. So yes, it's expensive, and there are ways to not make that be a barrier. Are there theological questions? We answer that. Somebody's making challah right now. High five. I feel pretty lucky. My wife makes challah, and she took care of it last night, so the whole house already smells good. Let's see. Yeah, somebody's putting some nasty stuff on there, so we're going to skip that over that. So listen, I want to thank everybody. I'm going to close in just a second. Before I do, I want to point out one thing that prompted me to give this lesson today is that, so right now I teach in a school called the Jewcurious School, and this is a 100% online school of Jewish things. As it is now, our students learn a weekly Torah portion where we get together and have a discussion live online, kind of like this, only Zoom, so people can kind of talk. I could hear other people talking. We also have a weekly lesson on some aspect of Judaism or theology or Jewish practice. We just finished a 4-week series about God and how different ways Jews think about God and talk to and about God and hear from God, philosophy of free will, things like that. Because it was requested by some of my students, this next week, I am starting, sometime it's like TBD, but next week I'm starting a Intro to Judaism class in the Jewcurious School. This is a class that is a conversion track class. And so if you've been wanting to access an Intro to Judaism class for purposes of conversion, but you live too far away from the closest one, or you work at night when the class is offered, or you have, I've talked to people who have anxiety issues and it's hard for them medically to leave the house, much less go to a synagogue. This could be a solution for you. So I invite you to, there's a link below. It's jewcurious.school/info, and that'll take you to an information page about the Jewcurious School. And so next week we are kicking off this class that is going to be approximately 26 weeks, so about half a year. And the way it's set up, it's going to be about an hour or so, just kind of like this. It's going to be about an hour or so a week, every single week, live, and it's going to be recorded. So if you can't make it live, you can watch the recording, you could watch the replay, you could hit me back with questions. There's going to be discussion boards where you could ask your questions kind of asynchronously and chat with me about certain things. There'll be downloadable materials. Every single class we have will be recorded in video and also audio. So you could take it on your, take it in the podcast, wherever your job takes you. And we talked about that a little bit. So this is going to be a fully online conversion class. And just to make that 100% clear, this is part of my theology, philosophy, personal opinion as a conservative rabbi. I don't see how somebody can convert to Judaism online. There are programs I've seen online that will do that for you, like take this video class, check these boxes, and boom, print off your certificate of Jewishness. That's not how it works, or at least that's not how I'm willing to help it work, in the sense that I fully believe in all the steps that I've talked to you about. You have step 1, learning. Step 2, get a sponsor. Step 3, or step 2.5, dudes only. That's not something you could do online necessarily. You find people online to help you with that, but don't do that online. Go to the Beit Din, go to the Mikvah. So there's a lot of that stuff that you can't do online. However, I think online is a great place to do all of the learning that you need to do, just like the class I teach now. If you take my Intro to Judaism class, not mine, it's a different program, but I work there. If you take that class, that doesn't make you Jewish taking the class. It gives you all the information that you need to become Jewish. And oftentimes I'll sponsor some of my students. So you get your learning done, you can find a sponsor, but then for the other steps that take place in the physical world, you'll need to find other people to help you with that. There's extra expense sometimes, but your sponsor can help you with that. And so what I'm offering this as is a fully online alternative to in-person classes that aren't necessarily accessible for everybody. And you can find out about that if you go to jewcurious.school. There's a link. It's the second link below. Find out about that. Sign up there's buttons to sign up as a student, and it'll take you to a checkout page, and that there is a tuition involved because there's a lot of technology and a lot of time involved. And it also, I find that when people pay for a class, they are mentally more there than if they're just hopping on to a YouTube live video to make jokes or whatever. So if you want to join this school, we'd love to have you. It may or may not be right for you. If you have questions about it, you can throw them in the chat. Maybe I'll answer a couple questions live, or you can hit me up on Facebook. I'm really accessible by Facebook Messenger. Just go to my Rabbi John Carrier Facebook page, open up a message and type something to me. I had a great conversation with a couple of people yesterday who wound up joining the school. So that's what I have to offer in that regard. I will say, if you are in the Los Angeles area and you want to learn about Judaism, you want to take a class with me, I highly recommend you find the Miller Intro to Judaism class. That's intro.aju.edu, and come to that class live. I think that's going to be a great experience for you. But if this isn't something that you can access, check out Jewcurious.school/info and see if it's for you. Vanna asked, just because it's relevant, Vanessa asked the question, do you normally have to pay your sponsor? No. I've never asked anybody to pay me to be their sponsor. I've gotten presents afterwards. Like somebody brought me back, a friend of mine who has Scottish family gave me a necktie in the new Jewish tartan. So the Jewish people recently got our own tartan in Scotland. So he brought me a Jewish tartan necktie. And just because there's other Scottish things that I like too, got me a bottle of Balvenie, which is kosher, by the way. So sometimes, it's nice to get your sponsor a gift. You don't have to, but I don't know any sponsor who charges to be a sponsor. And so, I mean, when you're paying for something, you're paying for the class. You might have to pay the Beit Din for their time. You might have to pay the Mikvah for maintenance. But I don't know a rabbi who charges people. If you feel like, just as an expression of gratitude, you want to make a donation to their synagogue, or you want to get them a gift or something like that. Balvenie 20 years, one of my favorites. No, I'm just joking. Please don't do that. Try to cut down. But don't feel like you have to pay a sponsor. I've never charged for that, and I don't know anybody else who does either. I will just throw in there, if you take your conversion class with the Jewcurious School and you reach out to me to be your sponsor, if I think you're ready, I'll be delighted to be your sponsor. No extra charge. The only charge is for, not even a charge for the class, really. It's a charge for being a member of the Jewcurious School, because we just have a membership fee that takes care of the maintenance of the site itself and some of the resources that we provide. And I'll say two things, and then we're going to be done. You guys have been super patient, very active. One thing is, if this is an interesting class to you, but you have no intention of converting, the Jewcurious School is absolutely still worthy of your consideration. First off, the class is going to be a 6-month overview of like all things Jewish. You're not going to go deep dive into Kabbalah or anything like that, but you are going to get a very broad understanding of all sorts of aspects of Jewish life. What we think about God, the nature and diversity of the Jewish people, where the Torah came from and all the commentaries that came from that. What do we think about that? What are the mitzvot? What are the commandments, including the dietary laws and Shabbat observance, holidays, Jewish time, Shabbat, and then Jewish ethics and Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, and our partnership with God in making the world a better place. So we're going to cover all those bases that could be worthy learning for you, whether you convert or not, or whether you're already Jewish. A lot of times in my classes, people are already Jewish and they want to learn stuff they didn't learn in Hebrew school. And as my friend Adam says, Hebrew school is way more fun as an adult. Trust me on this, because there's some adult stuff in Judaism that we don't get to talk to kids about. So that could be worthwhile for you. And so the last thing I'll say is, because we just opened the school and it had because we just opened this class, it hasn't started yet. I'm making a special offer to my students who are already in the school that they can take this class for no additional charge over the Jewcurious School tuition, which is currently $36 a month. Or if you want to do a whole year up front, I knock a couple of months off of that just as a gratitude for your commitment. So $360 for the year or $36 a month. And as long as you are a member of the Jewcurious School, you can access all of our Intro to Judaism classes. And if you want to reach out to me to be a sponsor, and that'll be covered by your tuition. And so, again, if you need to go to a mikveh, that's not included. If you need to find a Beit Din, that's not included. But I will help you find those resources as your sponsor if you select me to be. So I'm really grateful to have been able to talk about this today. This is, as you know, near and dear to my heart as somebody who became Jewish 19 years ago, who now has the privilege of teaching Torah and teaching people who are Jewish and people who want to be Jewish and people who are just Jew curious, frankly. So I'm living the dream right now. I'll tell this story another time, but you should know that this is my lotto job. How I put it, several years ago, I decided, okay, I wanted to figure out, I was in financial analysis and, management consulting and things like that. And I thought, what would I do if I hit Powerball? And I went through a whole mental exercise and it came to this. I would be a rabbi. And then after I was a rabbi for a few years, I was like, what kind of rabbi do I want to be? And I did the same thing. Like if I hit Powerball and I didn't have to worry about working for a living or student loans or anything like that, what would I do? And I'm doing it. So I'm reaching people online who are Jewish, who are not Jewish yet, may never be Jewish, but they're Jew curious, helping them on their path because people help me on my path. And I'm living the dream. Thank you for being a part of that. And I'll catch everybody soon. Thanks for hanging in there. Thanks for the great questions. And until next time, hero, peace and Shabbat Shalom. And this is very dramatic, but thank you everybody for watching this a second time. I still don't know how to turn off a YouTube live video, so this could take a second. This is like we're officially in blooper territory. So this is a little bit embarrassing, but I'll live. I've been embarrassed before.